as we get started, let's start with a little bit of a chalice study. I'm so impressed with your chalice. I bring my own sometimes because you never really know. But it was so fun to preach with like a really embodying.
If you're going to have a flame, make it big, you know?
So our chalice study words are from the UUA brand report, which they put out a couple of years when we changed the logo and the colors. I thought those colors are part of our branding. And we also created some language that we really hope any Unitarian Universalist congregation feels free to use. I know that we talked for a while about elevator speeches and how hard it is to describe who we are to especially new people, and some of the language is supposed to help with that. So from the brand report, we are Unitarian Universalists. We are brave, curious, and compassionate thinkers and doers. We are believers in what is good, what is right, and what is just. We have radical roots and a history as self-motivated spiritual people. We think for ourselves and actively object to what we believe is wrong. We have a track record of standing on the side of people, love, justice, and peace. Our faith has always been motivated by a desire to contribute to the greater good. We are a house without walls, a congregation without spiritual boundaries, and a movement towards a more action-oriented faith in yourself, your gods, and your belief. Simply put, we are a guided path towards a better you and a better world.
Where can I get a copy of that?
Yeah. I can find it for you. There's also, in another presentation I used, but I don't know if you've noticed that, I guess maybe a year ago, they created an intro video that has like colorful line drawings. Have you guys ever seen that? I highly recommend just using it and like putting it on, like literally cut and paste and put it on your webpage. It describes who we are really well. And it's fun and cute, so what I can do is have like some follow-up materials for folks, so maybe we can circulate like an email list and then I'll send stuff. So what are we talking about today? So I want to talk about this spectrum. I use the spectrum for a couple of different workshops. And the reason why I was so delighted to find this spectrum is because I had a bunch of small church asking me all these questions at the same time that had to do with like outreach and how do you get new people in, and also like how do you keep people from getting burnt out and all these things. And then I found this spectrum that showed me that it's all on the same continuum, right? So if you think about your relationship with the congregation as a spectrum, then you have people out on the other side who don't know about us yet, and then they get curious, and then you have to welcome them, and so on and so forth. And then they become an integrated leader going on. I will be talking mostly about this first left side couple of things, and actually Renee's doing a talk that almost completely dovetails with like the other end of the spectrum, so if you're interested in that part too, be sure to connect with Renee later on to talk about those things. Kerry McDonald is our current Chief Operating Officer at the UUA, but before that he was the Director of Outreach, and he created, I think Renee actually helped with this quite a bit, but he created a material called Love Reaches Out, which is a study guide for branding and outreach, which I highly recommend to you. You can easily Google it, Love Reaches Out. If you put Unitarian Love Reaches Out, you'll find it. It has a lot of helpful ways that your congregation can have a conversation about what's your core purpose and how would you describe yourself well to others. And most of what I talk about today pulls from that. I'm just giving people time to put right down. Love reaches out. So today, I'm going to make you do things that I personally hate. I'm going to make you talk to people you might not know about what your congregation does, and you're going to have to move around a little bit. So sorry about that. But really, my job gets easier and easier as I discover that really the expertise already lives in the congregations, and my job is to get congregation participants together to talk to each other. So that's what largely we're going to be doing today. I'm going to just show you a couple of clips of things or give you like a little nugget, and then I'm going to have you get together and talk about what it means in your context. These are the guidelines I would like to use to have this conversation today. I wonder if we could just read them out quick. Can you just pick a line and read it out loud?
R, take responsibility for what you say and feel without blaming others. E, use empathetic listening.
S, be sensitive to differences in learning styles.
P, ponder what you hear and feel before you speak.
E.
Examine your own assumptions and perceptions.
C, keep confidentiality.
T, trust ambiguity, because we are not here to debate who is right or wrong.
That's my favorite. I also love the whole ponder what you hear and feel before you speak. If you're kind of a judgy person like me, I've really gotten a lot of traction out of the I wonder what makes this person say this, which is always helpful. So back to the spectrum. So as I said, you're really the best source of information for each other to learn from, so that's why we have kind of a cross-colonization process. So you'll be sharing, as I said, how you respond to these, or things you might already be doing, or things you might be thinking about with others in a group, so we can just spread all of that goodness around. One thing I'll ask is, I've noticed that I run workshops and I get people in groups and I say, talk about this thing, and then often they will just talk, and that's awesome. I want you to connect. This is only the beginning. If you haven't met this person, if you just met this person and you really want to find out more, please sit with that person at lunch. But what will help today is if you actually talk about the things specifically that I ask you to, unless you find it's impossible. I really hope I always hope that these events will be kind of the beginning of beautiful friendships, and certainly not your only opportunity to talk to people. I also hope that you'll exchange contact information, be able to talk later. Where are we? So I talked a bit about full service model church earlier today, and I've included that in there. I really think it's important for folks in small congregations to know some things about how that model functions, because we've all been told that that's kind of church, and there's some things about that you need to know. So you don't have to be bigger to be a real church, right? You're already a real church. You don't have to you don't have to have a room like this that you meet in. You don't have to have a committee structure. You don't have to do any of that. You are already enough. If you wanted to be a full service member church, if you don't have 125 members, it's going to be really impossible to do it. Not impossible because people try, but it's going to feel terrible and be very hard. So if you don't have 125 members, give yourself a break.
100 short.
What?
So we're about 100 short.
But who's counting?
Don't feel alone.
Right. For sure. 60% of our Unitarian Universalist congregations have under 120 members. You wouldn't necessarily know that from the way people talk. I think it's actually more, 69%. 69% are small churches, so I think they deserve more attention and focus, and you'll see why in a minute. 21st century church won't look like the full service church model of the 1950s. You already heard me talk for 45 minutes about that. It's going to be something new, so there's no point trying to get on a bandwagon and the band and the wagon are heading off to the side of the cliff. Your only job as a church to be real. It's like Velveteen Rabbit. Your only church is to bring the love and grace of Unitarian Universalism to your people, your community, and your world in the way that feels the most true to who you are. That when you've done that, that's it, you're done. There's a place in New England, I think it's Maine, where the main thing they do is they make pies for the city servants, like firefighters and teachers. They make pies. I mean, I would be thrilled to get a pie thanking me for my service. That is such a gift. I would so much rather a congregation do nothing but make pies than spend a lot of time figuring out how they can implement some sort of governance structure that really doesn't matter. So I really want you to remember that about being a real church. And there's some awesomenesses to small churches. You already have what it takes. We don't exactly know what 21st century church is going to look like, but we do know that small churches have two very important qualities already, and that's going to be really helpful to you. One is that you're adaptable. You're adaptable because you have to be, right? You had one person who kind of ran all the children's programming, but then that person moved away. Or you had one family that pretty much was the children's programming, but that family moved away. You're like, oh no, we don't really have children. So in my experience with small churches, they can turn on a dime when they need to, and that's a really important quality because you want to be responsive to the world in which you live. The other thing you want to be is authentic. I was amazed during the presidential campaign that Hillary Clinton was using a lot of language that could have come out of a UU church. And there's also a whole bunch of commercials. I don't know if you've seen them. I really noticed them. I've seen a commercial for Airbnb. I've seen a lot of commercials for, I can't remember anymore, some phone. That is all about like, bring your uniquenesses to the whole. Like, we are all good together. We're better together, Hillary Clinton said all the time. So this is language that we use, but those companies and that candidate wanted something from you, right? That language was being used to get you to do something for them. Only in church, I think only in church, are we using that kind of language to benefit the person who's hearing it. And we do so in an authentic way. And it used to be, like a generation ago, we talked about excellence in church a lot. But what we're finding with the next generation is like sometimes when we're not excellent, it feels so real that people's hearts are open, right? Millennials are looking, we have this like, find the millennial game that we're always playing. As a Gen Xer, I'm always a little bitter, like, because no one ever played Find the Gen Xer. I guess we're just always there. But when my little, like, 6-person choir got up and they sang their little hearts out, it didn't matter to people coming in that their notes weren't always exactly right. It mattered that they were coming and giving a gift with their hearts. So small church, I don't want to encourage you to do things badly all the time, but if you do things authentically all the time, that serves you well. So keep that up. Also, simplicity is authentic. So if I find small churches like, well, we're only able to have one social justice project. Please have your one social justice project. It is awesome that you have that. So we're going to start with the first little nugget of information to reflect on. It's about a 6-minute video done by Kerry McDonald back when he was the outreach director. It wasn't that long ago, but he looks younger. I'm afraid like Obama, he's going to age in front of us. He's going to talk for about 6 minutes about just the general religious landscape. And then I'm going to have you get together in groups of 3 with people that are from different congregations, or even 2. And talk about it with some question prompts. Don't freak out when there's a chart in here that you can't read because it's too far away, because he's going to describe it. So just like, if you have chart anxiety, just take a breath because it's all in there. Just listen, just listen. And also, I'm just going to hold the mic to the speaker, and I think that will work for the sound.
Hi, I'm Kerry McDonald with the Unitarian Universalist Association, and I want to talk to you today about what's going on in religion in America. We are in the middle of a sea change in how Americans interact with religion. And the biggest change that we're seeing right now is the number of Americans who have no connection to any religious community at all. Today, 23% of American adults, that's about 56 million people, have no religious connection whatsoever. That isn't whether they go to church on Sunday or synagogue on Saturday, but when you ask them, do you have a connection to a religious community, they say, no, not really. And that number is up from 9% in the late 1990s. So big changes happening fast. So let's dig a little deeper. This is a graph from the Pew Forum on Religion in Public Life. And it talks about the trends that are happening away from organized religion and towards no religious affiliation whatsoever. This is similar to the spiritual but not religious group you may have heard of and how they're growing as well. But for whatever it's worth, every major survey out there agrees with Pew on these trends. Gallup, the General Social Survey, Faith Matters, they all agree on this trend away from organized religion. Looking at this graph, you see the number of adults in every age group, every generation, and the percentage of adults in that generation who have no religious affiliation. And I want you to notice 2 things about this graph. The first is that the number of adults who have no religious affiliation goes up in every generation. On the low end, here, the lucky few or silent generation, that's Americans born roughly 1928 to 1945. You see 11% have no religious affiliation. On the young end, the millennial generation, born roughly after 1981, is at about 35%. So that number is going up with each generation. The second thing I want you to notice is that there are two bars for each generation. The one on the left, the pink bar, is from the Pew survey from 2007. The one on the right, the blue bar, is from Pew's 2014 survey, where they asked the same questions that they had 7 years earlier. So this gives us really valuable trend information, and we can see exactly what's happening and how fast it's happening. And the changes are happening pretty fast, because the second thing that I want you to notice here is that in every age group, the percentage of adults who have no religious connection is going up. It increases between 2007 and 2014. So that means these changes are happening really fast. So how do these shifts impact Unitarian Universalism? Well, here's where our history comes into play. Unitarian Universalists are in many ways very similar to our mainline Protestant cousins. And that's not an accident. That's because our history is as a liberal Christian group. Now, in the 60s, when the Unitarians and the Universalists merged, we embraced a wider range of sources of wisdom and affirmed different ways of thinking about what's important in life. But the way that we organize ourselves, the way that our worship services work, is still very similar to our Protestant roots. It's also not an accident because we've been a religion of converts for a long time. 80 to 90% of the folks who call themselves Unitarian Universalists didn't grow up UU. Most of them grew up Christian, and every time that I am in a room giving a presentation and I ask folks to raise their hand who grew up in something that wasn't Unitarian Universalism, another church, maybe no church at all, and it's always a majority of the folks in the room. So folks have come and sought us out because we are different and because we embrace a wide variety of faiths. Folks have sought us out because they can love whom they love, they can believe what they believe, they can be who they are, and that is affirmed and valued in a Unitarian Universalist faith community. But what happens when that world turns upside down? What happens when the folks who would have been seeking us out a few decades ago now aren't interested in any church at all? A few years ago, the Unitarian Universalist Association partnered with congregations to promote ourselves as the uncommon denomination, the place where God doesn't get in the way of church. And I was so proud, I remember when I saw these, that I cut the ads out of the magazine and stuck them in my files. But I have to wonder whether this pitch will work as well in the future. Perhaps God isn't what's keeping people from church. Perhaps it's the church itself, the form of church. We have to figure out how we can meet those same needs for affirmation and meaning-making in the world that doesn't rely on looking the way that we've looked for so long. Another way to think about this is the Sunday morning decision. 50 years ago, in most communities in America, the Sunday morning decision seemed to be, which church should you go to? The church down the street, maybe the one around the block. When folks moved in down the street from you, you might ask them, where are you going to church, and would you like to check out mine? Now, that's still true in many parts of the country, but it's less and less true across the country. Because today, the Sunday morning decision is not church versus church, but church versus anything else in the world. Take a walk in the woods, read a book, have a cup of coffee, go to soccer practice. These are all ways that people find connection and meaning that don't rely on a traditional way of going to church. Remember, there's still a hunger for spiritual experiences and for finding meaning in the world and for connection. The same hunger the church has served for a long time, that's still there. People still crave that kind of experience. But we have to figure out what it means to serve that, to be the welcoming places and affirming places that we have been for so long, to advance our call for justice in the world in a way that doesn't just rely on Sunday morning decisions. And Unitarian Universalists across the association right now are grappling with what that means for them in their communities. Lend your voice to the discussion.
what I'd like you to do is find a friend that you don't already go to church with and talk about these things. How do these trends that you just heard about, I'm not talking this, how do these trends that you just heard about, like the notion that it's not church versus church, it's church versus everything, that people are becoming more and more religiously affiliated. You may find that people who do come to your doors have never experienced church before, they haven't rejected the church, they don't know what church is. How's that affected you? In what ways has your congregation responded or adapted or even noticed these? And how else can you imagine response and adaptation to that? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to talk about that. All right, folks, let's watch this next video. You can stay where you are. We'll just keep these groups unless you want to mix it up later. Welcome to.
Here.
So
You can sit and
this is another video, just a few minutes long, by Peter Bowden. Peter Bowden has a little bit of a weird delivery style, according to me. So if you also think that, still just try to listen. I also recommend, I know just demographically, sometimes he's going to be talking about kind of online presence, and sometimes there's so much anxiety about how to do that. Like, we know we have to do it because of the aforementioned millennials again, but we don't know how. So what I really want you to do is just hear the message about the pre-qualified visitor. That's really the point, and not to get too wrapped up in like what your Facebook presence is for right now. And we're going to do an awesome job of starting this video, I believe. Did it work?
Good work.
Now, we're talking about some big things here today, some huge shifts, but Naomi just mentioned something that's really significant for a lot of us and in our culture, and that is membership. Membership. And I know that's a concern for many of our institutions, our congregations, clergy, lay leaders, and so I want to take a moment and just connect this social media revolution and the changes that it's bringing about to trends in our membership, because I think that's going to make you listen more closely and hopefully take this message home. So I'm giving you the thing that you really want to hear so that you'll digest and take home what you need to hear, which is an even bigger story. So let's talk for a minute about membership and social media. All right, we all want more members, right? It's so great. They volunteer to do things, and when they're good members, they give us lots of money and have children, and then give us the children too. Traditionally, when people have been looking to connect with the new faith community, this is going back pre all this technology we've talked about, to understand, to know the congregation in question, you'd have to spend some time in it. And so there's this phenomenon of church shopping. I have to go around to each one and visit. Spend some time, really get to know it. Okay? Do the recon. We hope that after the shopping, they choose us, right? Now, social media is changing the way this happens. So, go back before the social media to the internet, all of a sudden, instead of people coming through your door, your church door, as the front door, your website became the front door. More and more people, once Google came out and we started having access to this information, we became trained to anything I'm going to check out, especially if there's any anxiety or danger associated with doing the new thing, I'm going to do the search first. So no one goes to church, increasingly, without checking out the website first. Now, I opted to show you that door instead of websites because so many of them are scary. They don't represent the beauty of your congregation, okay? A lot of our websites pale in comparison. So people start looking at websites and judge your community based on Does the website look appealing? Are they communicating a story? Can I sense who you are, what you're about by that? Okay. We have so much to do in this area. We could do a day on it. Okay. That still matters. But what's changed is once somebody goes through that web door, the next step is no longer visiting in person. Going to church for the first time is really an anxious, challenging experience. So what we do is, we have all these new social media tools that we can use to connect with your community. We can listen to podcasts, watch video, all these things. And so people, instead of like, well, do I go to this new church not really understanding what it's about and church shop in that way? Or, since it's available now, do I engage with all their media and see what it's like in my pajamas? Pajamas. So they check out your Facebook page and start seeing what you're talking about over time. So they're just now going about their lives, and whatever you're sharing with them is how they start to perceive you. Facebook groups. Some congregations have groups where members can connect, and so they actually can start interacting. Podcasts. Before somebody comes, I had somebody come to Channing Church where Amy was the minister, and I introduced myself because he was new. He's like, "Oh yeah, you're Peter." And then we talked, and he'd been listening, he'd been reading. He knew more about that congregation than some of the people who were there because he did his homework, and he decided, this is the place for me. And the tools that people can use, if we use them to figure this out, are just growing. Pinterest, all sorts of things. Twitter, there's so many Unitarian Universalists we can connect with. So this notion of church shopping is now happening online. Now, you may think people still come and do this in person. Some. But what's happened is when people show up at your door, your church, come in, they have already done their church shopping. They have pre-qualified themselves to be a member of your congregation. As long as you follow through with what you've presented online, you are gold and they're on track to being your member. Instead of having a long period of discovery on site to figure out if it's a match, they've made that determination. And so now our opportunity, our window to actually engage with them in person has been compressed. They show up pre-qualified. And so to connect with them, get them involved, make sure they have friends and are starting to contribute and live out what we say we're about through congregational life. You have visits. And if you don't make that church shopping way of discovering who you are, what you're about, available, what do you think happens? They connect with the church that does. So the number of actual visitors you receive, pre-qualified to join, is actually in some way correlated with how sophisticated, wonderful, and representational of you your social media is. So, to quote Keanu Reeves, whoa, we don't have much time. Our membership journey, the path to membership, it starts online in new ways. So, regardless of bigger changes in the world, we have to figure out how to be there online too.
Multi-level experience I'm having with you guys, floor to table. So I don't show this to make you anxious about your ability or inability to do things well online, because remember, like, the best gift you can give is your authenticity, right? So if you're authentically like me, one of those people who is sort of at a website, like static website level of things, or even not even that, if you never even think to look online for things, that's okay. But you're in a world where people are going to be pre-qualifying themselves before they come in your door, because the social pressures against church attendance are so high that the vast majority of people who will be interested in you are not going to want to take the courageous step of coming into the place just cold. So they're going to be looking online, most likely. I know that some of our churches in this greater area are in places where essentially there isn't a lot of internet service, so please excuse me if you're in one of those. But generally speaking, people are going to do an internet check to see what you're offering. And you want that, it doesn't have to be that sophisticated, but it does need to reflect what the church really is like, authentically. To reflect, give them a preview, a front door experience. Like imagine if they're looking in the front door, are they seeing from your website what will actually happen if they look in your actual front door? So that's the first thing to think about. We have a UUA website template that if these words don't mean anything to you, you just need to find someone to whom they do, because it's extremely easy to set up. It's got all the language that every UU congregation is going to use about basic things, and then you customize it to your people, your pictures, your data. And you can get that from the UUA for like $50 a year. So please, if your website is like a huge drag, or if you don't have one, or whatever it is, if it's way out of date, consider getting that template and using it to just make the front door of your church be true to what the experience inside the church is. The other thing I was going to mention, the pre-qualified. So a lot of visitor tables, you know, you can see how he's describing what a lot of visitor tables try to do, which is like deliver a huge amount of information to people who come in the door, because you have to like tell them all about yourself. If they don't know anything, they have to learn about Unitarian Universalism as a whole, they gotta learn about you guys, they gotta learn about all these different things. So just for a minute, do the mental exercise of what happens if they already know a lot, right? Because they know what Unitarian Universalism is, because they've done some online research, not only of your congregation, but of us at the UUA. They've done Google search just to see what you're doing, so they know what you've done in the community, and they also happen to know what we've done in Phoenix, and they happen to know what we've done with Black Lives Matter, and they happen to know a whole bunch of stuff that has nothing to do with your area. And they've already somehow decided that there's a connection between them and you that matters to them. How would that change how you welcome them when they're already coming in half ready to sign a membership book? Because they've gone against all of their social pressures, they've gone up against all the things they could do on a Sunday, and they've come in your door. Does that change in any way the way you think about how you greet them and what you tell them when they come in? So I'd like you to get in your groups, talk about what in your congregation should definitely be understandable online, and to talk about if people are coming pre-qualified, they're coming with their hearts on their sleeves and their spirits open, how does that change how you might relate to them once they come in your door? So, 10 minutes on that. Hey, welcome back everyone. So I have an article to hand out that's also written by Karen McDonald, but we're going to skip the discussion on it because the next discussion, it's that pile of paper if you could just hand it around. And if I could have one, that'd be great, because there's one line in here I like. It's about, so we're talking about, remember we're on the spectrum, right? So first it's about who's outside of your doors that you might want to attract, right? So we're talking about the changing religious landscape. And then if those people are curious about you, starting the spectrum, how do they find out about you? So we talked about website, right, and the way in which you welcome. And now we're going to talk about the last thing for today along the spectrum is about the difference between why people come to church and why they stay in church. And the line, so I'll have you read this later, but the line I like the most is, seriously, all are welcome at the movie theater, but I'm still not going to movies unless I know what's playing. I was like, oh, that's true, right? So saying all are welcome isn't enough. And I think we'll just stay in this open group to talk about this one. So it boils down to this, that people seek out church for one set of reasons and they stay in church for another set of reasons. And maybe you've had that, like people, some churches have a lot of success with the beginning part of that, or they have a lot of success with the end, but it's hard to have success with both. The reason why people come to church is often because they're seeking meaning and they want to make a difference in the world. And the reason why they stay is because they found a community of people that they love, that they come to love. And so a lot of our smaller churches are a community of people who love each other, but it's not, you can't market you will not be effective marketing, we are a community of people who love each other, to newcomers because they almost never come looking for that. It's not something that I think in our culture is really readily understood. They will think, oh, well, I have a community, or I don't know what such a thing is, that they're so divorced from that sort of community. But what they often are thinking is, I hear there's this thing called religion. I think it would meet this sort of yearning need I have inside of myself for understanding the deeper meaning of things. Or they say, I really want to do good in the world, but I don't know how to channel that, and I really, how, especially in the current political climate, how do I feel like I'm making a difference in the face of a lot of hatred and meanness and horror? So if you can tap your early messaging to that about yourselves, in what ways can you find meaning here in our place? In what ways can you make a difference here in our place? That will be really appealing to the people who are coming in the door. But then you have to do something tricky. You have to pivot your message once they're started coming into, this is a community of people that love each other and that care for each other, and that looks like this. And those are two very different things. So these two quotes are from people who write about this in Pew Studies and stuff like this. So Americans may select their congregations primarily because of theology and worship, so it's meaning-making, spiritual growth, etc. But the social investment made within that congregation appears to be what keeps them there. Robert Putnam wrote that book, Bowling Alone, that came out a number of years ago about the disintegration of our social structure. When you can provide an opportunity for congregations to experience a social structure that is innovative and new to a lot of people who are out there who've never experienced that before. The top response for the decision to attend church was, I wanted to deepen my spiritual life. And the top response for staying was, I love the community of people. And that's for folks of color. So I have seen some churches that are really good at just the first. But most small churches are really good at just the second. And you kind of need to be good at both to get people in the door to stay.
Would you clarify a statement you made there, almost under your breath, and that is for people of color? Is this a quote that you're saying from that, or what?
The people that said, I think it's actually in the thing, but the folks that studied, that they got this qualitative data from, were folks of color.
Okay, so I thought.
Just in case I do a multicultural welcome workshop as well. And a lot of you are like, well, how can we develop our welcome for folks of color so that then we'll have folks of color as opposed to our regular stuff for white people that we normally do? It's sort of like the implied message. But what I guess I'm trying to say is that's for everyone, right? For everyone. So you don't have to think, oh, yesterday we were talking to Sheila about battling white supremacy culture, but today we're talking about back to our white folks you. This is how you do it. How do you create an environment that deepens spiritual life in a multicultural context? And then how do you also create a community of lovable people who aren't always fighting each other? Just to throw that in.
It strikes me that one of the ways to do that pivot that you talked about, which is tough to do, is that if I, as the pastor, am tasked with getting the message out around deepening that we have a deep spiritual life here, that we have a response to the world that is, this kind of thing, and I can preach on it, and I can be out there in the community.
Yeah.
The pivot comes when people come in and my congregation is doing the pastoral care. If I have to do the majority of the pastoral care and the public face, when people come into this congregation, there won't be enough of the connection to keep people there, almost. And so, and I actually think that's one of the strengths in UU congregations is often we don't expect the pastor to do all the pastoral care.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if that's one way of doing the pivot.
I think that's a great idea. I mean, the pastoral care is extremely powerful. It's very connecting, and every congregational pastor knows that if you want people to latch onto you like ducklings, you provide pastoral care. So I think you're exactly right. The more you can do that to each other, exemplify what religious community can be like by care for each other and, practical emotional ways. I think that's a great way to do it. Also, there could be kind of like a starter version of that for new people, so like buddying, ways of like partnering in the early stages that might be a little less like, I don't know. Sometimes you want to create something for people who are having crises or particular needs identified, like they don't know yet. You want to create a healthy connection opportunity for those folks too. Let me see what the next is. Questions? So the question for this is just how do you put a foot in both worlds? Spiritual life and community life as folks become integrated. When people come, how do you meet their need for deepening their spiritual life? I think sometimes there are groups of folks who have been together for a really long time skip a lot of this. There's like shorthand and they don't think about it that much, or they don't have like professional clergy. So you want to be sure that you do, even in simple, authentic ways, meet folks' need for deepening their spiritual life. Because we are a religion, not just a social club, right? And that's the name of that article is Join the Cause, Not the Club. And once people have come, how do you create a community that will encourage them to stay? Any thoughts on any of this that have gone well for you?
Yeah, I think that from a tactical perspective, this is all really good stuff. But strategically, we need to get way to the left side of that spectrum that you put up. How do we create, we talked about this in our group, how do we create that curiosity to even get the people in the door where we can start tactically approaching them
Yeah.
once they're there?
Did you have
from
ideas?
fulfillment to community. And, is that something that the whole congregation politically should be responsible for that? Is the pastor tasked with being, having to be in the community and be involved in community things that are other than the church, like chamber of commerce, and associations, and all that stuff?
Yeah. Did you have ideas? I mean, those
Well,
are great ones.
I think that, I'm on the search committee for, we have our interim pastor that's leaving, and one of the requirements that I would like to see is that a pastor that is very involved in the community. Of course, depending which level of pastor you get, it's hard to say how involved that would be.
Right.
But I think that the congregation needs to require that of the pastor, but then, as you said, our pastoral care is also out to the community, where we have to be involved too in support of that or in conjunction with.
Yeah.
And it's a daunting task.
I actually think it's one of those tests like every little bit makes a difference. So I don't find it that daunting. I guess just to respond to what you're saying about the minister, I guess I might encourage you to identify the value that you have. Like our value is that we want to present ourselves to people who do not know what church is and do not know what we are. We want to present ourselves to the community in a way that might make them curious. And then figure out together with your pastor. I mean, sure, you might have an eye to an energetic pastor who wants to be out in the community, but also plan to figure it out together, how that will happen. But I was just thinking, I have a lot of, my family's all pretty secular, except for the crazy religious people. So I was just thinking about like the benefit of putting a church out on a sign out in front of your church on Christmas Eve that just said, we're having a family Christmas Eve service at 5 p.m. Some welcoming, it looks like this. Community, whatever, like little things that you think, oh, they meet the need of the person who's coming, not my need to have you come in here and help us with our budget concerns, but your need that you don't really know to express, like how can I demonstrate that that need might be met here? And that could be like if you're in a small town, like having things in the paper, having booths at fairs, having a banner at the parade, Side with Love is not hard to digest as a message. Just little, I think every little thing makes a difference, and build it like a snowball.
That's what we've been doing in Syracuse. The two churches have sort of agreed that if there's a community event, we show up as Syracuse Unitarian Universalists. We wear our little orange shirts. I hate those orange shirts. It's an ugly color, but everybody knows the color. And then the line is, come try us both out. Everybody does. Figure out which one works for you.
That's awesome. And then how much easier to do it in a group
And, well, and
Than just
because
a
I
church.
might be able to get 3 people from my church, which isn't enough, and then get 4 people from their, 5 people from their slightly larger church. Now we have 8 people.
Yeah.
That's a much better presence.
Yeah, for sure.
And we don't look like we're arguing, and we don't look like we're arguing with each other, which we don't, but we don't look like it.
Right, you're on the same team.
All on the same team.
And that's more impressive, like, you don't usually see even like Methodists or Catholics doing that, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I've seen a problem. Like with Watertown, we have Fort Drum up there. We get some really fantastic people that come to their church for a year or 2, and then they get transferred somewhere else.
Ministers come to your church, oh, the people, the congregants. Yeah, so how do you be creative with that limitation?
Yeah.
I also had I had that experience in my church too. But you know what's great about military people is that they get up and running so fast, right? Like they have to make community immediately. So I wonder if there's a way in which, like, how can you create something that's a little bit more permanent, even if the people are coming and going? You know, how can you offer something? People, so you move to a new town, you don't know anybody except for the same army people, you're kind of seeing the same army base, like so things you can offer is Insta community, people who aren't in the army and the military, pastoral care for people who are involved in military efforts is so important if you want to get that complex. But there's lots of ways your church can commit to always having a continuous message to people without, to people who are transitioning or transient in that way, that would be a little bit more permanent for you. And isn't relying on like that person to come in and get to know you and then start something on their own that meets their needs, like we usually do with churches. Michelle?
Question, usually when I think about, deepening someone's spiritual life, I think about like a special small group ministry group or a special adult education group. So I'm trying to think of, what are the ways to deepen spiritual life in the 1 to 2 hours we get their visit on a Sunday? Is that just really focusing on worship as a spiritual deepening opportunity? And what can we do to make that deeper?
Yeah. Well, these are my opinions, but I think, right, for your average person, taking an hour out of their week to go to worship is the most spiritually deep thing they're going to do. So you want to make that time count, especially if you're small and that's really what you can do. And then there's plenty of materials out there like Soul Matters and stuff like that, or even a pastor could collect kind of a daily devotional kind of thing, or a weekly food for thought, or something that you could also add on that would be easy for you to do, but kind of keeps the ball rolling. Like, I think that might be useful. But I don't think you need to overthink it, because I think for the average American, just going to church on Sunday is like exponentially more than they get. So I think just make that time count. That's my opinion.
Okay, add on to that. What have you seen as far as doing something different from a traditional Protestant-esque liturgy? If we were to get playful, there would be some resources to spiritual deepening in that Sunday morning that don't look like a traditional Protestant.
Yeah.
Formula.
Right. Well, for small church, and I've seen people do soul matters circles as Sunday worship, like a very small church that was really struggling with filling the pulpit. So then if the monthly theme was transformation or whatever, then they had worship on that one Sunday, but the next Sunday they had small group. So that's one thing you could do. There's a whole world of not Protestant worship type things out there that you could do. Taking it away from Sunday morning is hard, but also would grab you a whole bunch of folks who can't do that time. But I think that Sunday morning time is precious enough and identifiable enough to people that, like people who are in church still identify that as sort of a holy time. It is kind of a holy time. So, when you start doing, then you have to just more to explain if you're like, well, it's like Sunday church, but we have a Thursday night. I don't know. There's a whole bunch of ideas I'm sure you have as much access to as I do. And it kind of depends on what your congregation can stomach. That's interested in doing that. I think, you want to, the idea of being maximally flexible and any ideas, just brainstorm and see if any awesome ideas come and follow those, if there's energy behind them to try them out. Did you?
I
just want to follow up on that a little bit. We spoke earlier about younger people especially not being attracted to the 1950s form of church. And that's a little bit of what you're saying too, you know, that form, that Protestant church form is not maybe going to be so much what they want to have.
Yeah.
So, but the people we have in church now, or that's what they like, they're there.
Yep.
So finding how to do both of those things, you know, how to be welcoming to younger people who really are looking for a spiritual deepening
Yeah.
experience, but the form of that I'll say old-fashioned, you know what I mean, kind of church is not, that form is not appealing. So I don't know how to do both of those things.
I don't think that it's the form of Sunday morning worship that is unappealing unless that worship is joyless and boring. I think that is unappealing is our committee structure.
Okay.
So my son, who's about to turn 20, went to college and immediately converted to Catholicism, like within months, because he, and obviously grew up BU, because he wants like smells and bells and the long history and liturgy that people have thought about for thousands of years. I'm not even convinced he really agrees with the Catholics, but he likes that form, so I wouldn't feel bad about your form, to be honest. I wouldn't, that's my opinion. I also don't necessarily, like I've also had younger people say, I look at, and this is true for me, I look at a computer, I'm looking at a screen like 15 hours a day. I don't want to see like fancy PowerPoints at church. I want to see human faces. I chose to like leave my home and my screens and come to be with you. Like, what are you offering that's different than the world outside is offering? Well, you might be offering human beings, like in real time and real space. So I wouldn't work so hard against your worship form unless it's really hard for you to do. I would work against, like, you have 120 members and you have 45 committees. Or, you know, once you've been here for 3 weeks, so now you really have to think about how you're going to help us with, you know, the budget, or you're going to help us with our board of trustees, or you're going to help us with whatever. Because, like, how do you keep giving to them for long enough, you know, until they feel like a sense of belonging and ownership, and then they want to help? Does that make sense?
Yeah, very much.
I like the last paragraph in this handout, where it talks about promoting ourselves as being bold and compassionate and reverent, where it drives right down to the essence of people's spiritual yearning,
Yeah.
rather than saying, yeah, we're just a bunch of really great people.
Right, we're not just nice people, right? Yeah, boldness, compassion, and reverence. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, that makes it not the club, right?
Yeah.
Like, I belong to a pool at home. That's like a Washington thing, is to belong to a private pool. I suspect it's because they had segregated pools in the past, so I really have to think about that history and how much I want to be a part of it. But anyway, we have private pools. And so the private pool wants me to join their board. The private pool talks about community. The private pool talks about how, like, children have been coming here for generations and growing up. But it's a freaking pool at the end of the day, right? It's not a church.
But, yeah.
So how do you be the church with boldness? Like, pool doesn't talk about.
We have a high dive at our pool.
Right. Like, I don't know the pool for reverence, boldness, and compassion, except around like their glass beside the pool policy. But you know, you can find a group of people that you can stand to be around in a bunch of different places, and people are going to PTA, and people are going to whatever, you know, fill in the blank. What are you offering then? Like, you're offering a religion, and you're offering an orientation in the world towards love that really matters now. I mean, this is the best time to be a church like us, because we have a thing to offer that is visibly apparent what happens when that thing isn't around anymore, right? That's what we have. So it shouldn't, like, if you just spend a little bit of time thinking about how to frame that, in a world where there's scary stuff happening and neighbors are being sent away and people don't have enough to eat, here's a place where we actively work against that. What a great message, and easy to understand. Right? And simple and authentic. Then you just have to do it. So we're coming up on, it's after, so it's lunch. I hate to delay lunch. Thank you so much for
Me too.
being with me today, and I will be at lunch for another hour. Let me add just a little bit of word from the pocket guide from Melissa Harris Perry. to send you off. We are the certain and the seeking, the lifers and the newcomers, the beloved and the brokenhearted, the insiders and the rejected, all of whom have found home in the extraordinary yet intimate communities of Unitarian Universalism. So may it be so for you in your work and in your lives, and it's been wonderful to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.